Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Todd Veinotte Show here on 95.7 News Radio. Steve Murphy of CTV News here with another Murphy Monday, but I have been talking with Todd via text. And Todd is on track, he says, to be back, hopefully, in mid-November. And he says he's doing better every day. Now, as for his beloved New York Yankees, who trail the Los Angeles Dodgers 2-0 in the World Series, Todd admits in a moment of extreme candor that the Dodgers are the better team. Now, I don't know if that's a concession that the series is over, but the patented honesty we've come to expect from Todd Veinotte, even about his own team, the New York Yankees. That's the disembodied voice of David Hensby. We're going to get to you in just a second, Counselor. I knew that was coming, of course. Look, this is the first Monday, the first full day of the 2024 provincial election campaign, and from the worst-kept secret department, although he was extremely coy about it when he was here with Dan Alstrand on Friday. Yesterday, Timothy Jerome Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia, confirmed the worst-kept secret in this province when he asked the Lieutenant Governor Art LeBlanc to dissolve the legislature for a general election on November 26th. This will be the second November election in modern history. The last one was in 1984 when John Buchanan took the people of this province to the polls on the 7th day of November. This will be the second latest fall election in the history of Nova Scotia. Now, maybe that doesn't matter, because under our system of government, a premier can call an election anytime he or she wants to, although we do have an Elections Act which was amended by the same Tim Houston to set the election date as the third Tuesday in July. That would be the 15th of July. That was the date that was set by Tim Houston in his first act as Premier of this province. And he did it because, as Leader of the Opposition, he said it was wrong for premiers to call elections for their own political advantage. Well, now he says we need an early election because he needs a new mandate, a stronger mandate to deal with the federal government. And he also says in a tweet that I and many others received yesterday that people are facing financial pressures and that it will take long-term vision, policy changes, and investments to support them through the affordability challenges and improve Nova Scotia for everyone. So he wants to put the PC plan to the test, and he's doing so on the 26th of November. Now, do you agree with this? Is there a good and pressing reason for an election call? Does it matter to you that the Premier said one thing then and is doing something else now? Will that affect your vote? Do you care? The insiders will tell you they're banking on the public not caring. Well, we're going to hear from you on that subject and any other about an hour from now in Open Phones Halifax, and we're going to have a conversation with Dalhousie political scientist Lori Turnbull later in this hour. And, of course, we'll have some questions for her and then comments from you. And then during the noon hour, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Lisa Barrett. You know, it's almost 5 years since the virus that causes COVID-19 began to make people sick around the world. It led, of course, to a global pandemic, to a global lockdown. It changed all of our lives. And during that time, the voice of Lisa Barrett became a very familiar voice. She became a familiar face on television during that time. She's here today to talk about what we now know about COVID that we didn't know then and that we need to know now as the pandemic doesn't actually continue, but the disease continues to spread. And then at 12:30, we're going to spend some time chatting with the legendary Irish musician, investment broker, and man about town, Denis Ryan, about the music and the economy and politics. And if you know Denis Ryan, you know he's outspoken, and I'm sure he'll be outspoken here with us today, too. But we begin, as is the long-standing practice on this broadcast, with municipal politics and councillors on the hot seat. In this case, these are re-elected councillors, and you can call now with your questions and comments at 405-6000. Here, fresh from their election victories, District 2, Lawrencetown, the Lakes, Chesuncook, Eastern Shore Councillor Dave Hensby.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Hensby. And from District 9, Halifax West Armdale Councillor Landslide Sean Cleary, who now awaits the results of a judicial recount before claiming his final. That must be a bit nerve-wracking, Sean, waiting for a recount You know, the election's now almost 2 weeks ago. When will you know for sure?
We'll know Thursday. That's when we go to the judges' chambers, and they'll hear the application from the other candidate. And if the application is granted, then we go immediately to a recount. It's my second time, actually, so
I was
I'm quite
going to say,
comfortable.
you've been down this road before.
I had one in 2003 in the provincial election, lost 35 votes election night, recount, went to 50. But then it was a blessing in disguise. I went back to the by-election at HM Council and been there ever since.
You're the longest-serving member of council.
Yes, now I am, yes.
David, you won a decisive victory, 53.7% of the vote in a two-person race. What message did you take from that so many people in your district, I mean, you won fair and square, no question. A lot of people didn't vote for you. What do you make of that?
Well, there was a lot of issues there. I had some pressing issues in the Lawrencetown, Lake Echo area about the ditch tax issues. I've had issues about the transportation, local transit services, issues about the active transportation sidewalks, Reporters Lake and Muscatauga Harbor, the tax rate issue on that. And also some people want, just a change. And but I was able to, I think my body of work over the years spoke for itself and still have the confidence of the majority of the people.
Same in your case, Sean. I mean, if your numbers hold, it's a legitimate. I'm not questioning the legitimacy of these outcomes, but I think politicians need to pay attention when many of the people they represent vote for someone else, which is the function and the practice and the purpose of democracy. Not a thing wrong with it. But do you take a message from that?
Yes and no. I mean, put it in context. So on the peninsula of the three councillors, I got the highest number of votes and the highest percentage of votes. So even though it was close in my particular election, I think turnout was 45.5%. In District 9.
Which is pretty good.
Not pretty good. It's the best. And it's the best by far for many elections compared to any district. So I think engagement was relatively high, but engagement in municipal politics is considerably much lower than it should be when you think about the fact that municipal issues touch your life on a daily basis. Where your fire, police, potholes, what can be built next to you, rec centers, libraries. It's everything that touches you on a daily basis.
But, we make that argument here on this program often. People call here and talk about municipal issues, usually more than others, and yet when the day comes or when the period comes for voting, most people don't vote. Even in District 9, 55% didn't vote. So let's talk briefly. And again, the lines are open for your questions and comments, but I think this is something worth talking about too. Why don't people vote, even though it has never been easier to vote? Never.
Well, especially in the municipal election, when you can do it online or by phone. So I have a number of theories about this, but if you look at the news coverage, for example, you watch your nightly news, you're scrolling social media, the vast majority of issues are national and international, and then provincial. Municipal politics usually gets maybe one or two lines in any newscast, and it's usually about something scandalous or something outrageous.
Right.
And it's one of those things that it's hard to decipher what the issues are and how to engage in them. The other thing is there's no cues like there is in provincial or federal politics. We don't have parties. So you can immediately, depending on your philosophy or leanings, you can say, I know what a Liberal is, I know what an NDP is, I know what a PC is.
Right.
But at the municipal level, it's independent. So you've got to find out what each individual candidate wants to do, who they are, et cetera.
And the onus is often on the voter. David, do you have any thoughts on why people don't vote? You've been around this game a long time. Fewer and fewer people voting every time, it seems.
Well, it's frustrating because I knew that apathy was my biggest threat out there. People said, you don't need my support, Dave, you got this hands down. Only having 34.5% voter turnout in my district was quite low, and that was my biggest fear of people not coming out to vote for me. I know those who voted against me was turnout, but those who wanted to keep me in there, some of them took the effort to vote, some didn't. But the issue is, I think we've got to find some new incentives. I've always been advocating for tax credits. If you vote, your name automatically gets on the voters list. You should be able to apply for a tax credit, be it municipal, provincial, or even federal.
Pay people to vote. Well, reward them.
Exactly.
To vote. What about finding them for not voting?
Well, they do that in Australia and New Zealand, and I don't think we want to go punitive-wise. I'd rather have it more of encouragement instead of discipline.
I've asked you each about what you've taken from your own electoral victories. I want to take a moment and talk about the bigger message that's being sent by the entire community to the entire council, because half the people around the table will be new when you people meet. I think it'll be next week, in all likelihood. That includes the mayor, by the way, Mayor Fillmore. The other half is incumbents like you, David, and you, Sean, but there will be a lot of new faces and a lot of new voices. What message did you, and I'll begin with you on this, Sean, what message did you hear from the community at large, to the council at large?
I think, as I was knocking on door the last few months, frustration and anger, and not at, there are particular issues, but just generally. And I think this is, if you look at New Brunswick, the results there provincially just recently, if you look in BC, and who knows what will happen here provincially, but there's a lot of people that just don't feel like things are going their way. And whether that's, at the municipal level, it's traffic, whether it's, property taxes, whether it's whatever, there is a lot of just negativity, a lot of frustration.
Are they telling you to do things differently? Are they asking for the council to change some of its more controversial decisions?
Well, what I heard a lot was about the assessments and property taxes.
Well,
you got to find a new way of doing assessments, a new way of doing taxes, whatever the case may be. Some people rather see flat taxes, services, paying fees for services versus value of your home. Those are things that we need to reevaluate. But the biggest thing about the new members of council coming on, only 2 of them were defeated that from the previous council. 5 of them were new coming in. So there's going to be a steep learning curve for those coming in. They got to pick up the pieces where the previous council was in regards to the regional plan initiatives. We're looking at revamping. We're now going to the suburban plan reviews for all the municipal planning strategies in suburbia parts of Halifax. And we still got some major opportunities before us. We have the Joint Regional Transportation Authority that we didn't have before, looking at major infrastructure opportunities, for transportation. So hopefully we can work with JRTA to get some of those initiatives accomplished. Okay.
Councillors on the hot seat with Cleary and Hensby. And you're first. Go ahead with your question here, Jake.
Yes, I'll just ask my question there, and then I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
Yeah, sure.
Just wondering, Councillor Hensby, why in our area, everywhere else in this province, the rails, the trails, ATVs are allowed on it, but in our area, we're not allowed on it. But we pay registration, we pay insurance, we pay fuel tax. Like we're pretty much the only ones who pay any money towards it, but we're not allowed to use it. But everywhere else in the province, the rails, the trails is a completely shared trail.
Okay, that's an interesting question. David, is that the case, and if so, why?
Well, we have certain areas in my district that are like that. We have the Shearwater Flyer coming out of Shearwater going into Cole Harbour. Then we also have the Blueberry Run that goes from Seaforth to West Chesapeake, Porters Lake. Those are shared use trails where motorized use is permitted. But the only problem, though, is the section of the Gatesbrook Greenway and the Muscat Albert Harbour Trailway systems are just active transportation only. The province of the day gave letter of authorities to local community groups to make sure that that's the type of model they want to have. I know there's some discussions now with some of the groups in Muscat Albert Harbour, hopefully that may look at is, could we have winter access to the trail? Because there's opportunities to connect the Muscat Albert Valley to the Muscat Albert Harbour and in the Eastern Shore even further. If they had that one conduit coming into Muscat Albert Harbour, especially in the wintertime, I think there's no harm in looking at it. Maybe it's a pilot project, because when the ground's frozen, the ATVs and snowmobiles are not going to do any damage. So I think that we should have at least look at the opportunity. I talked in the past about having perhaps a parallel trail system. The corridor is 100 feet wide with those rails corridors. They could have built a parallel trail if they wanted and just share the bridges and causeways. But now with the Provincial Road Trail Act, there might be opportunities here to have ATVs on the side of the road in certain areas. So that's hoping that the Road Trail Act can be used that way to make access for our off-highway vehicle use into our local communities.
All right. The voice of Councillor David Hensby here with Councillor Sean Cleary. And we want to hear from you with your questions and comments. One question I would ask you all to consider here as you listen today, and this is an opportunity to tell the members of council what you want them to do differently. Are there changes you want to see? When you voted in the last election, what was the message you were trying to send to people like Sean Cleary and David Hensby and the whole council? We'd like to hear from you on this. 405-6000. Steve Murphy on the Todd Veinotte Show here on 95.7 News Radio. Me, oh my, 18 after 10 on the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm here with Councillors David Hensby and Sean Cleary. And I think if the listeners are voting with their phone calls today, everything's good at City Hall, because the phones are relatively quiet here this morning. So I think you've both been reelected and everything's just tickety-boo.
What did we say about disengagement earlier?
Well, it is, after all, only 10 days since the election. So presumably many voters are feeling that their voices have been heard, and now they're waiting for some action. I've been watching what's going on in Doug Ford's Ontario, where he, the Premier of Ontario, has ordered the City of Toronto to start walking back some bike lanes. I think this is something that we need to talk about because it's a recurring theme on this program. And anecdotally, I hear a lot of comments about bike lanes, particularly as they apply to traffic and traffic congestion. So, Sean, let's talk about this. Should we take a look at the way that bike lanes are being implemented, particularly on the peninsula right at the moment?
Well, yes and no, depending on what you mean by the question. So, but you got to put this in context too. So go back when Doug and Rob Ford were anti-bike lanes 10 years ago. And so this is nothing new for Mr. Ford. The reality is, and I heard this a few times from especially people who don't live in my district but live just near it trying to get onto the peninsula through my district, that bike lanes are causing traffic. There's no bike lane on Quinpool. There's no bike lane on Chebucto. There's no bike lane on Joe Howe. There's no bike lane on Bears Road. So tell me how bike lanes are congesting the traffic on those streets. So the idea that we need to revisit bike lanes for congestion is just ludicrous. What we need to do is revisit how we all move around the municipality and what are the best ways environmentally and financially for people to do so. We unfortunately have a lot of legacy infrastructure. Our city was founded 400 years ago and built for people walking and horses, not for cars and bikes. And so squeezing multi-modes into our current network is really difficult.
Dave, I can well imagine that bike lanes aren't the biggest issue you are facing down the shore, but you have a vote on this. You want to revisit bike lanes?
Well, I would like to see more of a rural strategy in regards to paving shoulders of our major collector highways. You know, the highway number 7 has been identified by Bicycle Nova Scotia as the Blue Route Network area. But I have other roads like the 207 highway and other major connector roads that should have paved shoulders. We have a lot of people riding and walking in the communities. Trails are one thing, but they don't connect the neighborhoods like the highways do.
Right.
And, we've seen great improvements in Lake Echo when we had the paved shoulders through there. We have paved shoulders in Musquodoboit Harbor now from east of the river to Salmon River Bridge. If you go into Sheet Harbor and beyond, there's 17 kilometers of paved shoulders from the East River Bridge all the way out to West Quaddy. So those have been great improvements to the area. So we need to have a strategy for more paved shoulders. We did that in Mineville, and the people just love it. So I think paved shoulders are great in rural areas, but we just need to find a funding mechanism to cooperate because those roads are done by the province, and we need to.
Would you be a yay vote for revisiting bike lanes in the city in the urban part?
Yes, I think we need to look at the strategy in regards to where's the connectivity. That's the biggest issue we wanted to look at was the connectivity of the bikeways in Metro, and I think that we need to look at that. So where are the gaps still? Let's fill those gaps and let's make sure we do it logically. A lot of people are concerned about these bump out, these temporary concrete islands that they have out there. I find them a bit of a nuisance in certain neighborhoods and stuff. I think we should revisit those particular type of apparatuses. But bike lanes, I think they're going to be necessary because we haven't seen yet the push we're going to have on e-scooters and everything else. Those little motorized vehicles, we've seen them now. We have a bylaw right now proposing the use of them.
Lots of them.
We're going to see lots more of those in the future, and they're going to be populating the bike lanes.
405-6000 questions for Cleary and Hensby, the councillors on the hot seat. Peter, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, every time something transpires in city council and it involves money or fees or anything like that, everything seems to be subject to the UARB, the Utilities and Review Board. And one thing I'm not clear on is who exactly is on the UARB. What were their positions before becoming a member or a part of the cabal of the UARB, and what and do they still have business interests with the province and city? I think that is a very reasonable question.
I think those questions are all very answerable. I mean, the membership of the UARB is on the website. Yep.
Okay. and so tell us what are their names and what are their previous positions and what are their positions now?
Well, I don't have all that information here, but I do think it's all.
Your councillors do.
Well, all right. Well, just a moment now. Just a moment. I think the answers are all readily available, but councillors Cleary and Hensby, do you want to take a shot at providing any of this information?
I'm just
looking. I see you're both on the website.
I'm looking up on the website, but I do know Jennifer and I do know Bruce. We're talking accountants and there's lawyers and engineers because they need different specialties when they're dealing with. Because remember, the UARB deals with things like rate applications from Nova Scotia Power.
What are their names?
I just told you,
do they
Jennifer
have
Nichols is one, Bruce
business?
Fisher's another. You can look up on the website. They have all the biographies of each of them there, Peter Dagsvik. And you're welcome to, if you have access to the internet, go to google.ca, type in Utilities and Review Board Nova Scotia, and you'll get all that information.
Well, thank you very much. I'm surprised you hadn't called me back with that information, Mr.
It's been a busy time, Peter.
Okay.
Thanks for the call today. I think the UARB is, if I might say so, an organization that has an outsized influence on our lives, and many people don't really understand what it is and how it works.
Well, they have
But
to
it is
remember, too, it's
it's a
amalgamated from a
provincially
number
appointed
of different boards previously, and they have a huge mandate.
Huge, and a huge amount of power, real power. All right, go ahead. Oh, I guess that caller's not ready. We are here with Councillors David Hensby and Sean Cleary, and they're on the hot seat. Up to you to put them on the hot seat today with your questions, but I do have a question I want to toss at each of you, and that is moving into the new council, which begins presumably next week. What do you consider job one to be, or issue number one to be, David, when the new council meets next week?
Well, first, just an orientation in regards to the municipality. What things are in progress right now in regards to the regional plan review and stuff like that. What some major applications that are before us. I think the new council members need to know how the council functions in regards to the community council structure as well as regional council plus the standing committee structure. So there'll be a lot of orientation for them to get the feel of the wheel, I guess you can say. So there'll be a lot of orientation sessions for them going on the next week or so.
But again, the public agenda cannot wait while the learning curve is being pursued. What's number one, Sean Cleary, in terms of dealing with the most pressing issue facing the municipality right now when the new council meets?
From what I've heard and from what I've talked to a number of the new councillors that will be taking their seats soon. Housing and homelessness will be the biggest issue that we deal with. It's been the biggest issue we've dealt with in the last year and a half, and it's going to continue to be the biggest issue until the province can get enough units available indoors for people. I was down in Wolfville not that long ago, and behind the old library, they have a tent in Wolfville. And it's an issue that everyone's dealing with, and we're dealing with it like we've never had.
And
to
of
deal
course,
with
the weather's getting cold. Today's
cold
the first day I have the winter jacket on. Chris, you have a quick question before we break for the news. Go ahead.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, actually. I hope I have time to get them in.
Well, we'll do our best here. Yep.
Look, David, you mentioned about, I believe, a tax credit for voting. That's something I've suggested on Todd's show in the past, and as a matter of fact, I suggested it way back in the John Buchanan days a long time ago. I thought it would work. What's your thought on something like that? How would it work? It's easy enough provincially and federally because we pay federal and provincial income tax, but how would that work on the basis of an HRM implementation, given the fact that everyone doesn't directly pay the property taxes?
It would have to be an income base in regards to on property tax. If you vote, you get a tax credit, and it goes against your income taxes. So we had to get recognized by the federal and provincial governments to make that initiative work. And that way, if you
easily said,
than done.
Yeah,
exactly. But the tax credit would also update the voters list because to be eligible for that tax credit, you got to fill out your income tax.
Right. Is that something you would, in this new mandate that you have for the next 4 years, would you push council to approach the province or to do something like that? Because I think it's a perfectly great idea, David, actually.
Yeah, okay. we talked about it in the past. We'll try it again.
Float one more question, Chris, because we have the news coming up here in about 30 seconds. You have another question?
Well, now I have a comment. Sean, you made a comment that Halifax was founded 400 years ago. In fact, it wasn't. It was 275 years ago in 1749.
Officially.
And as a matter of fact, for everyone listening out there, this is Halifax's 275th anniversary. Councillors, how come we didn't have a big celebration for that?
I have no idea.
David?
Well, Sean, you didn't even know when it was founded.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of Cornwallis either, but that's a whole other question.
Chris, I beg your pardon? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the
I said I'm not a big fan of Cornwallis, but that's a whole other question.
Did you know him?
I've read much of what, and there's a professor at St. Mary's University that I admire greatly, and I would encourage you to read his essay on the 3 lives of Cornwallis, presented at the group of folks at the Military Heritage Group.
275 years is a milestone, and I'm concerned as to why we
I'm more worried about Halifax in the future than I am 275 years ago.
Come on, Sean.
All right, I think on that note, Chris, I think we have to break for the news and the commercials to pay for it. We appreciate the call. Thanks, and we'll pursue that some more because 275 is a significant number, and I have had people say to me, "Why did it go largely unrecognized?" We can discuss that. We can discuss anything you'd like with the councillors on the hot seat when we continue right after this. Councillors on the hot seat with David Hensby and Sean Cleary. We've got a lot of calls now, so let's move right on to David. Go ahead with your question or comment, please.
Good morning, councillors. This is Steve Murphy.
Good day.
I was wondering with the bike lanes and the health care, those are okay. They could do. But what about for the homeless? And I'll hang up and hear about the answer.
All right, David, thank you. What are we going to do about the homeless quickly? Because, again, as I said a moment ago, it's also getting very cold out there all of a sudden.
So working with, so Halifax doesn't own any housing. Halifax doesn't have a housing program. But working with the provincial government, particularly the federal government nonprofits, over the last number of years, we've been able to create about 400 units. And I know I've had many conversations with Brendan McGuire, the community services minister. With the election, actually, things are on hold at the moment. But this fall and this winter, they were supposed to have several hundred more units available for indoors for people, which would take care of everyone living outside.
David, quick comment?
Plus, we also have to continue with our shelters that we have at the Halifax Forum, and maybe have to look at other facilities if we have a growing population of homeless coming up this winter.
All right, Mike, you've got a question or comment on bike lanes for the councillors. Go ahead, please.
Yes, just something about Sean had said earlier about certain streets not having bike lanes and there's still traffic on them. Not to be sound combative or anything, but do you drive in the city very much, Sean? Because there's lots. It doesn't take much to cause chaos in this city everywhere. Like, it doesn't matter that there's no traffic lanes on Quinpool Road. Or bike lanes on Quinpool Road, the bike lanes can cause congestion somewhere else, which causes congestion everywhere.
Well, that's a fair observation, I think, Councillor.
If we had bike lanes everywhere, but we have a ridiculously small number of bike lanes, like if you were to list them off, you could probably put them on one hand on
no, but
those
what
fingers.
I'm saying is just because, but you're saying because there is no bike lane on Quinpool that you can't blame bike lanes for that. But that's like saying, well, there's an accident on Spring Garden, well, that can't cause Quinpool to have traffic. What are you talking about?
It's like a funnel effect, I think is what he's saying, Sean.
Well, it's an entire network.
Exactly.
It's like a spider web. You pull on one side. But So again, if you can demonstrate by pointing out where the bike lane is causing the congestion, then I'll have a look at that. Otherwise, it's just conjecture. You have no data.
You want to respond to that, Mike? No?
I don't even know how to respond to that.
All right.
No. Have a great day.
Thank you. That's Mike. And William, you're next with your question or comment for Councillors Hensby and Cleary. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. Listen, first and foremost, I think it was Chris was arguing about the anniversary of Halifax. I know that the anniversary of the province goes back to 1621, which would be 404 years coming up in 225. So
right.
I think Sean Cleary should get some credit for 400 years because it is true. Anyway, the other thing I had to mention to David Hensby is I was out on Saturday to the pharmacy in Muscatobit Harbor, and you know, your signs are still up. I mean, like you say, 2 weeks after the election, isn't it your responsibility to take down your signs, especially the ones that are on public property?
All my signs are down as of yesterday. Sean made the mention that all the way to Sheet Harbor, they're all down.
Okay. There you go. Well, you appreciate the call.
In fact, I was taking mine off and putting Kent Smith's up. So
there you go. Listen, are provincial election signs permitted on municipal property?
Yes.
Without restriction?
In the right-of-way.
Yes.
Temporary sign bylaw doesn't allow them in certain places, like parks, for example.
But signs of any size?
There's a maximum size. Do you remember, David? It's like 4
by 4 the max. But the other issue, there can't be what they call the sunlight triangle.
Okay.
You can't block the views of the
at an intersection.
Yeah.
All right. Because the signs are already popping up. Well, I was going to say like the flowers.
They were up yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, they're popping up like the leaves are falling. Maybe it'd be better. Yeah. All right. Hi, Jamie. Good morning.
How are you today?
We're doing all right here. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. I just wanted to speak for 2 seconds on transit. There's a lot of people suggesting that we spend a boatloads of money on transit. Now, I'm not sure what's happening, but if you look at some of the plans that Tesla has coming up with these automated cars, I think our public transit is not going to go away in the next 20 years, but it is going to be much less than it is now. When you'll be able to buy a share in a car, and when you need a car, you go on your phone, you request a car, and one's at your doorstep in 10 minutes and it'll drive you right to your destination. So these things are going to become very small and very inexpensive. So I don't know how that. I wonder if anybody's considered that, or does anybody even know that, or because putting in all this public transit, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it may be a little short-sighted, I guess is probably a better word.
All right, David, comment on that?
Well, I think we need more park and ride terminals, in my opinion. They work very well, and I think that we need more of them or better capacity at the sites we have. Maybe we need to put parking garages on our parking lots because some of our park and ride terminals are full in the morning and you just can't get in them. So I think that's where our investment should be at.
All right. Sean Cleary,
just to say that it has been considered, and we are working with it, because if you think about it, you can't get rid of transit and just have everything by automated vehicles. A 40-foot bus takes 60 people, so that's 60 cars off the road. If you were to take every bus and put 60 cars back on the road, when we have over several millions of rides over with transit over the year, that's millions of cars you'd put back on the road. You can't do that. We just don't have the road space. So actually, public transit, active transportation is the way of the future. And automated vehicles like your Teslas and that kind of stuff will be a small portion of transportation, but it's certainly not going to be everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to move anywhere.
Jamie, thanks for raising that point here this morning. And Ryan, last word to you for the councillors here. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm wondering, since Councillor Cleary pointed out that there's no data showing what bike lanes may cause congestion, what data is actually available or has been collected on the bike lanes at all?
Actually, if you go to our open data at halifax.ca, you can see the bicycle counts for the counters we have on places like Lower Water, University, South Park, and you can actually track, and there's on social media, I'm trying to remember, I think it's Halifax bike counts or HFX bike counts, and they publish that data on their social media, so you can track that online.
How is that counted?
By counters. They have counters that have like computers and sensors inside, and so they can track each vehicle as it comes, or each bicycle as it comes by.
How long have they been in place?
Several years.
Do you have a sense? Do you have a sense of where the numbers are headed generally?
Increasing. And in fact, Nova Scotia now has, of all the provinces, we've had the highest growth rate in active transportation, and I think we are amongst, if not the highest, one of the highest in terms of active transportation, which would include bicycle use of all provinces across Canada.
We spend a lot of time on bikes, and I think we need to. It's a good issue, but the scooters are a big issue. I'm noticing more and more of the motorized or electric scooters, and more skateboards. As well. They're in a gray area right now legislatively, right?
No, most of them, the province updated the Motor Vehicle Act 2 years ago, and about a year and a half ago, and they included electric scooters. Basically, they're treated like bicycles in the new MVA.
So they're in bike lanes.
Yeah, and segways and everything else.
Well, where a bike lane exists, and legally they're not allowed to be on sidewalks, and you have to wear a helmet just like you would if you were on a bike. Wow. And so we're working with the two providers here in Halifax and with our new micromobility plan, because obviously they have some education with their users. Not everyone seems to know the rules.
Re-elected only 10 days ago and already on the hot seat. That's the life in politics. David Hensby, Sean Cleary, thanks for coming in here today.
Thanks, Steve.
We're going to take a few minutes of your time just to talk some provincial politics with Laurie Turnbull. But again, I just want to say this, and I've been listening to this for a long time. I commend the members of Halifax Regional Council for doing this. They don't have to do it. And in a lot of places, they don't do it. So hats off to Cleary and Hensby and all the others who come on here, and a big invitation to the newcomers. Get in here. Put yourself in the hot seat, because you learn a lot from the questions that people are actually able to ask, and we learn a lot about the way you answer, not just the detail you provide, but the way in which you answer. Well, grateful for that.
Just let you know that I'm not re-offering in 28.
Is that an announcement or pronouncement right here?
I'm not running for council in 28.
Okay, correct. So you're running provincially. No, all right. Thank you, David.
Never say never.
Laurie Turnbull with us next here on 95.7. So it's election season again in Nova Scotia. Round 2 gets underway. Signs from the municipal election have only just come down, and now we could expect a fresh crop for the November 26th provincial election. In fact, I saw some up this morning. Premier Tim Houston, of course, pulled the plug on the weekend, even though the same Tim Houston's first act in office was to set the date for this election as the 15th of July. So in a way, he's already called this election and he's now sort of changed the date. But here's the thing. It might not matter. In fact, insiders will tell you it won't matter. Well, with her thoughts on the election call, the timing, and the state of the race, we're joined once again by Dalhousie University political science prof. Lori Turnbull. Scale of 1 to 10, Lori, how surprised are you that we're having a provincial election on November 26th?
Oh, 0. I know that wasn't one of the options, but 0.
0?
It's totally going to happen.
What do you really think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I get it. I think Houston wants to go while Justin Trudeau is still prime minister.
Yeah.
And the more uncertain things are in Ottawa, and that just gets more prickly by the day, the less Houston is able to control that timing. And so I can totally understand. And it's not the dead of winter yet. The weather's not too bad. He can kind of make it work now. And so he's going for it.
But, I was saying earlier, this will only be the second November election in history, and this will be the second latest fall election in Nova Scotia history, in modern political history in this province. Does Tim Houston have a legitimate reason, a ballot question to take to the people?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think on some level, we go to elections sometimes because it's the time, right? It's 4 years. Doesn't matter if there's a burning question or not. People get to weigh in every 4 years. I think at this point, it's more the strategy around it. It's not necessarily that he's saying, I am going to make a fundamental change in how we are living and working in Nova Scotia, and I need your support and commitment and mandate to do that. There doesn't seem to be anything weighing that heavily. It's just a kind of tweak in the timing of a scheduled election. So instead of going at 4 years, he's going at 3 years and change.
Well, you've called it a tweak, but he's really only a couple of months into his fourth year, and this is, as you've just suggested, a broken promise. It's not a broken law because the law is written in such a way to allow the governor to dissolve the House whenever he wants, whenever he's asked. So is this going to matter? Is the broken promise aspect of this going to become a campaign issue, or is it going to burn out before the end of this program at 1 o'clock or shortly thereafter?
I think probably that. It's not, to be fair, there have been times where voters have been put out by having the timing of the election be politically driven, if we can put it that way.
Right.
And as you say, this is the prerogative, right? If premiers want to call an early election, if prime ministers want to do it, they're able to do it. The law doesn't prevent them. I think in Houston's case, there is a divided opposition, not a weak opposition, but a divided one that he takes advantage of because he knows that there's going to be vote splitting. He knows that, he knows where his support is coming from. And
yes.
Even if this is an annoyance for him, I think he probably concludes that it's not going to be one that he ends up losing votes over, really. There may be some, but ultimately it's not going to be the number one issue. People hit the campaign trail and other issues rise to the top.
But, Lori, you will recall that Tim Houston, as leader of the opposition, said quite convincingly that premiers ought not to be able to take advantage of election calls in this fashion. And it's the reason that he not only brought in a fixed election date, but it was the very first thing he did. Mm-hmm. Does that not seem like saying one thing and doing another? Is that in fact not saying one thing and doing another?
100%. He totally said one thing and is now doing the other. But you know what? I can remember back in 2007 when Harper had become prime minister, and he had been one of the people who was very vocally complaining about the prime minister's right to call an election whenever they want and how unfair that is. And so in 2007, there was a change to the Elections Act at the federal level to introduce the fixed election date.
Right.
And it was unanimous consent in Parliament. All of the parties agreed. Everybody agreed this is not good. And this isn't good for democracy to have to have no fixed election date and to have the premier be able to politicize it.
Yeah.
And then the next year, Harper went to his first off-cycle election, and they all do it. And not that I'm saying that makes it okay. I'm just saying it's amazing how they all have evolved thinking about this sort of thing.
Well, evolved thinking.
There.
Now that's a very euphemistic way of describing political opportunism. But the truth is, we could have real fixed election dates. We could have legislation that says the election will be held on this date unless the government falls. Or, putting in place some mechanism that would actually fix the election date, if we really even need to do that, because the Constitution also fixes an election date.
Yeah, the Constitution says we can't go longer than 5 years.
Right.
And so there's an end point, right? They can only kind of move this around so much. And I think that the thing is, if you want to start really getting legislative about it, if you really want to start putting in hard dates around the 4 year mark, you have to start getting into the constitutionality of it, right? Like there's nothing, at this point, there's nothing we can do to say that the Prime Minister doesn't have the right to ask for dissolution, and premiers too, and that governors general and lieutenant governors can't grant it. That's constitutional. Right. That's the way it is. Right. But could we start thinking differently about things like, hey, just because you lose a vote doesn't mean you lose confidence. And maybe if the government loses confidence prior to that 4-year mark, that you look around, maybe we have to go to another government. There are other ways of doing this. It doesn't have to be a steady diet of elections. Provincially, the Liberal opposition is on the ropes. Zach Churchill has lost 4 members, including his caucus chair, in the last week. The caucus chair has not only left the party, he's gone to the PCs. This is a damn tough place for Mr. Churchill to be, with the writs having been issued. 100%, yes. I mean, the floor crossings are going to be devastating. No matter when they happen or why, really, there's still, whatever the backstory is, there's always a sense that, okay, this person would have rather sit with the other party than with Churchill, right, with the Liberals. And that's going to be really hard for them to manage in terms of the optics of it. And even the substance of it, like having people leave who have experience, who have held ministerial portfolios, that is a major, piece of strength and networking and institutional memory that then goes to carry over to another party. It gives a sense that maybe people want to be on what looks to be probably a winning team, and it makes it much harder for the other parties, for sure. What sort of shape is the Nova Scotia NDP in at the moment, Laurie? So this is going to be Claudia Chender's first election as the leader, and so it will be interesting to see how that all plays out, and how the opportunity, like how the two opposition parties go at Houston, but also manage the presence of the other, right? Because the NDP has the fewest seats, but given what's happening with the Liberals, is there a possibility for the NDP to get ahead here? Is there a momentum that Claudia Chender could pick up? She does is keeping track of this all on Twitter, as I do. I can see, she's got some candidates that have some experience. Mm-hmm. It's possible that, I think it will be interesting to see how the two opposition parties fare in this election, whether there's a changing of the guard there. Are you in a position to make any predictions? I mean, do you have any sense of the way this is going, particularly when you consider that next door in New Brunswick, the incumbents have been tossed? The incumbents seem to be in some trouble in Saskatchewan. Incumbents facing challenges out in BC. Any sense of whether there's an anti-incumbency wave about to wash ashore here? The thing is, I think when people are in the kinds of situations we're in now, where there's an affordability crisis, there's a housing crisis, there's the sense that people just want things to be different. Clearly, there is a massive change momentum at the federal level. And so, will that, as you say, will that wash up in Nova Scotia as well? I mean, I have to think that Tim Houston would not have rolled the dice right now if he thought he was going to lose, to be honest. He would have waited. I mean, even if it meant that he had to go against Pierre Poilievre federally rather than Justin Trudeau. And of course, the Prime Minister is always the most useful opponent to a premier. Everything is the Fed's fault. And so if Houston really thought the numbers didn't look good for him, I think he would have rolled the dice against Poilievre later, if that's what happens there, rather than Trudeau now. But that said, I don't presume anything about what voters decide to do. And yes, I mean, Blaine Higgs, bam, that was over and done with half hour into the counting. That was a pretty decisive result. British Columbia is always hard to call. But yeah, even in Ontario, like Doug Ford, for example, he's gearing up for a spring election, which is a year early for him. Yeah, he wants to run against Justin Trudeau too. You bet. Yeah. One final question on Justin Trudeau, because he's at the intersection of all of this. Is he going to stay or is he going to go? I mean, today is supposed to be nominally some sort of a deadline from the 24 who refused to be named. They wouldn't sign it, but they would say it. Is he going to stay? Yeah, I think so. I will bet on that. I think he got it in his head that he's going to go to the next election as the leader. He thinks he can beat Poilievre. He thinks he's the right person to try. And I think that he's already said to the 24, I'm staying. And so I don't think we're going to end up in an election in October of 2025. I think this whole thing will curdle before that. Mm-hmm. But at this point, they can't even get anything done in the House. The Conservatives have this impasse around the documents that they want from the Sustainable Development Tech Fund. So it's an all-out crap show up here, Steve. And the Bloc Québécois deadline for doing something on the pension is tomorrow, right? The 28th. Yeah. So are we headed to a fall federal election, Laurie? I mean, if we're not going to make it to next fall, are we going to get through this fall? I don't think we'll end up with a federal election this fall. I think it's highly unlikely because the Bloc will position itself. They've done that very well. The NDP will hang on for a while, so the Liberals will be okay.
Laurie Turnbull, always good to read the tea leaves with you. We appreciate you taking our call and having a cup of tea with us today.
Anytime.
Talk to you soon.
Me.
That's Laurie Turnbull.
Bye.
Laurie Turnbull, political scientist at Dalhousie University, setting the stage for what I think could be a very interesting hour of discussion with you about the election call in Nova Scotia. It is Open Phones Halifax coming up at 11 o'clock. You're driving the bus now. You tell us what to talk about. We're going to talk about anything and everything, but I have a feeling that there may be people who want to weigh in on the Tim Houston election call. Do you want a provincial election at the end of this month? Is this something that is needed in the province at the moment? And what about Mr. Trudeau? What about the 24, in fact, it's probably more like 40 MPs who've all asked Mr. Trudeau to go, and they've given him until today to do it. Any thoughts about that or any other subject? Open Phones Halifax. Book your call with Vanessa Van Den Ness right now at 405-6000. Time now for Open Phones Halifax. Anything goes here for the next hour at 405-6000. Well, Tim Houston has really given us something to chew on here today, something to talk about. In the words of that Bonnie Raitt tune, let's give them something to talk about. And he's done that with an early call to the polls for our fall election here in Nova Scotia. This is not a surprise. In fact, I would say, listening to Dan Alstrand with Tim Houston here on Friday, the Premier all but coyly confirmed it. So it's not a surprise. But, you know, it is a broken promise. Because Tim Houston campaigned on a promise not to do this. And he did set the fixed election date in his very first act as Premier, Bill 1, introduced by Mr. Houston himself. He said then that it wasn't right for premiers to have the power to call elections when it suited their political purposes. And he basically called the election back then and set the date as the 15th of July, 2025. So now he's decided to do what he earlier criticized. And the question is why? Well, he's answered that. And if you'll bear with me, I will share a few words from the Premier's tweet on this yesterday. In the words of Tim Houston, I am quoting, these are not my words, they are his. There are two urgent reasons, he uses the word urgent, two urgent reasons why we're asking Nova Scotians to entrust us with government once again. First, the words of the Premier, people are facing financial pressures. It will take long-term vision, policy changes, and investments to support them through the affordability challenges and improve Nova Scotia for everyone. Our Nova Scotia PC government has a plan that will make it happen. And then he goes on, second, with the instability in Ottawa and a federal election coming soon, Nova Scotia needs a government with a strong mandate to stand up for our province. Our province risks, in the words of Tim Houston, becoming a political football in a federal election that could be held simultaneously with the current scheduled fixed election date. This is not in the province's best interest. He concludes Prime Minister Trudeau has decided to try to save seats in Ontario and Quebec at the expense of places like Nova Scotia. Words from the tweet from Premier Houston yesterday explaining or justifying why he is breaking the fixed election date law, which was of his own creation. So will this affect your vote? Is the broken promise a big issue? Do you believe or agree that the Premier has good reasons to have an election now? And you know, folks, every election is a referendum on change. So do you want a change at Province House in Halifax? Are you satisfied with the Houston government? Are you satisfied with the alternatives? At 405-6000, hey, Jean or Jean, get us started, please.
Hi.
Hi, it's Jean, obviously.
Jean.
Hi, Jean.
Yes. Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Hi. No, I won't be voting for Tim Houston. And the reasons being the health care hasn't improved, I don't think at all. People are still dying. the emergency rooms are still too full. And 1% on the GST is a joke. If he really means something, slash the tax on, or half the tax on the gas prices. Food is just out of this world. People, I'm finding it tough, and I'm sure a lot of other people are.
So you're a no, you're not impressed. Do you think we need to have an election right now?
I'm not. I think he's stupid to call an election right now. I think he's going to be really surprised that people are not going to be voting for him.
Were you a Tim Houston supporter at any point, might I ask?
I did. I voted for him last election.
Okay.
I thought he might actually do something, but it hasn't improved.
All right.
It hasn't gotten any better.
Glad to hear from you first off, Jean. Thanks for sharing your point of view.
Okay.
Good to chat. Thanks. All right, Paul, what's your view on this early election call by Premier Tim Houston?
Yes, good morning, Steve.
Morning.
I support Tim Houston 100%. I think it's a great time to call election. He's going to win this by a landslide. I mean, look at the alternatives. You know what they are. There's no question in my mind. Now, I am a true liberal. I have been all my life. However, Tim Houston's got my vote. I feel he's done a lot for this province. I feel the opposite than that lady. I really do.
Does it bother you in the least that he is breaking his own word to have an election now?
Well, not really, because now is the time when, this man cannot lose this election, in my opinion, personally. And I think, actually, they're going to gain more seats.
Well, we'll see.
I really believe that in my heart. Now, yes, he broke his promise, but he did give his reasons.
All right, and you agree with the reasons, or you accept them?
I accept them.
All right.
Whether we do or not, he's picked a great time to call it, and he's going to win by a landslide, no question.
All right.
I feel, actually, Steve, he's done more as a premier than several premiers before him.
All right.
I really believe that. Now, I really liked Mr. McLean, or
McNeil. Stephen McNeil.
Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I know his brother Barrett. Anyway, one other question for
yes,
you.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Are you going to appear on ATV on election night?
I hope so.
I think so, yeah. Okay,
Appreciate
good.
the call.
Good.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, take care, Steve.
You take care as well. 405-6000 here. It is Open Phones, Halifax, and Ryan, your turn. Go ahead.
So the last couple of weeks has been a lot of conversation about voter apathy, and one of the main topics or reasons that has come up from the callers has been trust. Now, let's look at two examples when it comes to mistrust for politicians. First would be Councillor Cleary. I've been calling in and discussing bike lanes with him for years now, and every time I've asked about any data or traffic studies, he's told me, no, there isn't any, we don't have that data. And
well, I think he just told you this morning that there is data, right?
And he said that it's been available for years. So I'm wondering why, if he's one of the main proponents for the bike lanes, he seemed to have no idea that this traffic study was being done and that the information's been available for years. I talked to him about it on this station just 2 or 3 months ago, and he said, no, we don't have any of that. And now he's saying we do, and it's been available for years. Why? See, this is one of the reasons we can't trust politicians, because either they're lying to hide whatever data is actually out there, or they're so clueless to even know that the thing that they're pushing for has data available for it.
Well, again, without saying which case it is, I would also say that sometimes politicians actually just don't know. And I might anger you when I say the following, but I don't think you can expect politicians to have every answer to every question, but they should be prepared to get the answers.
Well, and they should. Well, yes, exactly. And when they are, and as far as I'm aware, Councillor Cleary is the main proponent for bike lanes.
Right.
So if he's the one carrying that, then I would say he has a responsibility to know that there is data available for it.
All right.
Otherwise, why are you so vocal on pushing for it?
Well, and we do know that now. Fair enough. Appreciate the point, Ryan. Thank you. Have a good day, sir. Bye-bye. That is Ryan here on Open Phones Halifax. A quick comment or two from Mr. Mott. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
How are you?
something different for you.
Oh, listen, I'm having fun. I'm having almost as much fun on this program as you do. Who has more fun than you?
I'll give you a very interesting scenario on this whole thing.
Sure.
Now, first of all, Trudeau obviously put in Savage in their lieutenant governor, and I guess he's got that kind of power. Okay? So now what would happen if you had the situation where Trudeau wasn't happy with anybody in the Progressive going in, and he decided to tweet the ear of the lieutenant governor and say, listen, don't okay this man.
Yeah. Can't happen, Bill. No, it can't happen. I shouldn't say that it can't happen. I suppose it could in a thoroughly corrupt system, but in our system of government, once the lieutenant governor is appointed, and by the way, appointed by the king on the recommendation of the prime minister.
Okay, that's new one. I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah,
Good.
so really, I think that although, in the hurly-burly of politics, you could say somebody makes a phone call and says, don't do it, but that would cause a constitutional crisis in the country, and I'm confident it won't happen.
Well, what's the point of our premier going to him to get the okay, or what he was getting?
Well, because, again, the premier needs the permission of the sovereign, which is the King Charles, represented in Nova Scotia by the lieutenant governor, to dissolve the legislature and call an election. But really, the lieutenant governor never says no.
Well, it sounds like just an automatic thing. I mean,
it is. It's pretty well automatic.
I mean, the lieutenant governor's power is becoming weaker and weaker. It's a shame because, an example, Point Pleasant Park.
Yep.
And once a year, you used to sign the thing. And
that's right. We have to pay 10 shillings a year or something for it, don't we?
One shilling a year, I think.
One shilling. It's a deal.
That hasn't happened for the last 7 years. So
Well, I'd say let's get our shillings up to date with Buckingham Palace and pay up.
Good man. Thanks,
Bill. Good to hear your voice as always. We're going to take a brief break, then we'll be back to continue with your calls here on Open Phones Halifax. It's only on 95.7 News Radio. It seems Prime Minister Trudeau has put down that caucus revolt. The rebel MPs, 24 to 40 of them, gave him until today to resign, but he's already said he plans to stay on to lead the Liberal Party into the next federal election, which is scheduled for October 20th, 2025, if not before. Will Trudeau stay? Will he go? Does it make any difference? You can talk about that or anything else in Open Phones Hour here. 405-6000. They also tell me there's an election in the United States a week from tomorrow. And it's... if you don't know that, you haven't been paying attention, in the words of my friend, the late, great Rick Howe. It's said to be close down there, but, are you paying any attention? Are you concerned? Who's going to win? Open Phones Halifax, talk about whatever is on your mind today. And Tim, go ahead, please.
Morning, Steve. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Fine, thanks. 2 quick points. The young lady that lost her life in Walmart, there's certainly some things there that just don't make sense. Either Walmart isn't disclosing everything, but usually when you walk into an oven, generally speaking, there's an exit or an emergency exit that you can hit to get out. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't want to make assumptions, but it just, on the surface, it doesn't make any sense at all that, unfortunately, it cost her life.
Tim, best not to make assumptions. You're right to do so. I think it would be good if there was more information available because, the Internet in particular hates a vacuum. And in the absence of official information coming from police sources or from the corporation, there is a lot of idle speculation, none of which is very helpful and much of which can be quite hurtful. I, like you, however, would like to see more information, and I hope it will be made available when proper and prudently, because, as I say, nature abhors the vacuum, and the Internet is a very, very, very restless place.
Oh, absolutely. As it relates to the election, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed in Mr. Houston that although he had a fixed term election date for whatever reasons, and it's about his own power and glory, he decided to change that. At the end of the day, you only have your word, and it's costing us as Nova Scotians $13 million plus for an election that we don't need in a province that's already in debt. And I'm sure that money could have been spent or allocated in other ways and means to improve the lives of Nova Scotians.
Well, fair enough. But on that point, that $13 million is going to be spent eventually, whether it's now or next July. I don't know that the financial argument is a strong one because there has to be an election. I think the issue is the timing. And as you pointed out, the reason for the timing.
Well, to your point, yes, you're going to spend $13 million, but do we need to spend that $13 million right now? I would say we don't, or we could spend that $13 million on things that could improve or enhance the lives for people in Nova Scotia.
Yep.
I think it's absolutely irresponsible for him, other than his own personal gains and his politics, and that's the game he's in, to call an election.
Well, will it affect your vote, Tim? I mean, a broken promise or a broken word, is that enough to direct your vote?
Well, let me say this, Steve. You know, he said that he was coming in with a mandate at the beginning to fix health care. Has he fixed health care? I'll let others to decide or defer to that if he has or hasn't. I know many people that are still waiting for doctors. He can put whatever spin he wants on it. Mm-hmm. Now he's saying he wants to have a better position to improve his position with Ottawa. I'm not sure how he can predict who's going to be in government in Ottawa, but at the end of the day, I think it's just a smokescreen. And it's certainly irresponsible for Mr. Houston to have a fixed-term election. If you're going to have a fixed-term election, then live up to your mandate and call the election next year. Not sure why it's necessary to do so now.
Tim, appreciate the comments today.
Cheers.
Thank you. 405-6000, open phones, Halifax. Len, you're a patient man. Thanks for hanging in for me.
No problem at all, Mike. While I'm talking to you, you can't believe I see a family of deer walking in front of me going down into the woods.
Deer, deer, deer.
I think the season opens pretty soon, too, doesn't it?
Well, the political season's already open, so I guess deer season can't be far behind, right?
You know, Steve, I'm so glad to have you back on the radio.
Thanks.
I think you're one of the great people that on a talk show because you're so knowledgeable.
Well,
anyway,
I appreciate that.
The thing I want to say about Tim Houston, I certainly will give him my vote because I think under the circumstances when he came into power, he took over from the Liberals that were leaving the province in terrible shape, really, when it came to health care or everything. And so when you asked a new premier to come in and try to solve it overnight, you can't. It's impossible. I think the reason he's calling an election is he wants to be in power in the Conservative Party in Nova Scotia so that when the Conservative Party win by a landslide over Trudeau, he's going to have a better chance of getting things from the federal government being a Conservative.
Is that a good reason? Is that a good reason so far as you're concerned?
I think it's a good reason in one way because if you're a federal government in your province and the Liberals are in the federal part, I think it is a disadvantage.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the main reasons he's calling the election myself.
All right.
I don't see no problem in him breaking that promise if like you just said before, whatever it's cost to have an election, it's going to cost whether you do it this year or next year.
All right. Thanks, Len.
I think the Conservatives will win this by a landslide. No problem whatsoever.
We'll know in 29 days. Len, good talk to you. Thanks for those kind words. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
You have a great day today. And Open Phones continues now. Nick, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Doing very well, thanks. How about yourself?
Good. First of all, thanks for stepping up to the plate when society needs you to do a little bit more work and drill down on the issues that need drilling.
You're very kind, Zach. I'm not sure everybody calls this work. I have to tell you, I said this to Veinotte, I'm having a little bit too much fun for this to be work. Anyway, thanks for the work.
I'm not saying I don't see that. You're absolutely having a blast over there.
Thanks.
I'd just like to talk about the provincial election for a second.
Sure.
I'm not surprised. I think strategically it was the best move for the Conservatives to make. I think that if he had waited until a federal election, there would be so much mud in the air that it would be hard to see a provincial election through it. I think Tim did a good job in the last 4 years, and I think dynamic issues like healthcare, that are very complex. They take more time to fix than others, and he's done some work on them, but he needs, I'll be patient with the man.
Let me ask you a question, because, when we roll back the hands of time, Mr. Houston promised in 2021 to fix healthcare. To what degree, or what percentage would you say that promise has now been fulfilled after 3 years and change?
I think it's hard to even measure in a percentage format. There's been incremental progress, and I think that's important. I don't think there's a 0 and a 10 on the issue. Mm-hmm. I think that obviously everybody can have a doctor, yes, but you've got the aging populace, you've got aging doctors, you've got people graduating, and all of this. Yep. I think really we just need to be very competitive with the United States and the rest of Canada, and we need to really step up and pull the doctors in and make them want to live here.
All right.
I think too, personally, one thing that could help that is some more larger industry. And as much as I like the solitude of our nature, our beautiful forests and everything, I think that a bigger if we attracted some larger industry here, it would certainly make it easier to spend the tax dollars on doctors.
All right. I have to break right now for the news. I appreciate your comments, Nick. Good to hear from you today. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. It's Open Phones Halifax here on 95.7 News Radio Halifax, 405-6000. Another half hour for your opinions coming up here next. Sometimes you just have to let the rock and roll play out, especially when it's local rock and roll history. April Wine, Miles Goodwin, the late great. Steve Murphy of CTV News here with Murphy Monday on the Todd Veinotte Show from 95.7 News Radio Halifax, and this is your time to shine. This is the open hour in which you decide what we talk about. So, Sheldon, where do you want to go with this morning?
Well, Steve, the Premier's calling an election for one reason and only one reason. He knows there's no one that can come close to beating him. Simple math. And you talk about voter apathy and low turnout at the polls. This is one of the reasons. Like, this is a Carney and Rube situation, and we're being treated like Rubes. The public are being treated like Rubes. And the public has the opportunity to make a big statement by not showing up, by not voting. And I hope we take the opportunity.
But on your point, does it really help anything if we don't show up? What message does it send if we don't show up?
Well, the message is simple: that we're just not playing along. This is a silly game. We just have to take the option and not play along.
But with all due respect, my friend, it's the only game in town where democracy is concerned.
We don't need it.
We don't need the election, or we don't need democracy.
We don't need any of it. It doesn't. Not a lot has changed from election to election to leader to leader to premier to premier. Not a lot changes. And the next generation coming up, I think they're smart enough. They see that. That's why they don't turn up to vote.
So what do you do come election time? Do you vote?
I don't know. I have to think about that hard. I don't see me voting in this election.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing your point of view with us today. Thank you, Sheldon. So there you have Sheldon's point of view. He says he doesn't know if he's going to vote. He said the best message we could send is don't vote and tell the Premier and his government that we're being played as rubes and we've had enough of it. So, Mark, what do you think?
Well, to Sheldon's point, if you don't care about healthcare and you don't care about homelessness and you don't care about affordability and you don't care about the cost of food in the grocery store, then sure, don't be involved in the political process. But it is the only game in town. And if you care about any of those issues, you should be passionately involved in trying to find a solution.
And that involves voting.
It does.
Do you see a compelling reason for an election right now, Mark?
No, but let me spin back. I wanted to comment on something you said a few calls ago.
Okay.
And it was $13 million. So if the cost of an election was $10 million, and we have an election every 4 years, that's $2.5 million a year election cost to us. If it's every 2 years, that'd be $5 million a year. So obviously, having it on a 4-year period is better, and any shorter period costs more money. But I don't think that's the challenge. The bigger issue here is the prize. The normal process elections Nova Scotia would follow would see them getting quotes, a long timeline for ordering their printing, a tender process. But with the surprise, that goes out the window. So it costs more for a shorter time period, and it costs more because they have an accelerated time period, decreased time period for all the purchasing, and they don't get to tender, and they don't get to quote. They just have to buy and have it right.
I think that's an interesting argument. Maybe we're not getting the best possible value for our money, although I can tell you that Elections Nova Scotia is a very, very agile organization. And the ENS people have been scouting out commercial real estate in this town for months, anticipating the early election call. I don't know whether they got a good deal, and I think you make a very, very good point. Maybe there is a higher cost associated with a snap election call. Maybe that's right. But ultimately, there is going to be an election, and it will cost, $13, $14 million whenever it's held.
Mm-hmm.
But your point is well taken. It's well thought out.
Yeah, too. But you're right. Elections cost money, and they're well worth it.
Yep. I appreciate your call today. Good to talk to you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. I am looking forward to this. I don't think you and I have ever chatted on this program. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Murphy. Interesting about this election. I'm an outsider. I'm a PR. I don't even get to vote, but I get to pay taxes, so I have an opinion.
Sure.
So here's my opinion. An earlier caller mentioned that Nova Scotia may be in a better position if the federal election were swept by the Tories. Should there be called, a federal election be called, or whatever the case may be. And I agree with that, absolutely. That puts Mr. Houston in a better position, and I'll tell you why. Let's talk about carbon tax. We had a very good carbon tax situation under the Liberals when Mr. McNeil was the premier, and that was a cap-and-trade deal. Well, obviously, the current prime minister didn't like us having that cap-and-trade deal. Mr. Houston fought like hell to keep that cap-and-trade because we were doing our share and we were doing it right, but the prime minister didn't like that. So he said, no, we're going to give you 17.4 cents in taxes. Well, now think about that. There is one province that has a cap-and-trade.
Quebec.
Right? Quebec. Well, that's strange. I'm not going to go any further. Everybody knows that that's where he's from, and Quebec gets what they want because they got him by the short hairs.
But I guess the point is that when the feds looked at our system in Nova Scotia, they said it didn't meet the criteria required, and that's why we got the federal backstop. But anyway, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? Yeah. I've been dying to ask you this question because I hear you on this program. You're very, very well informed on issues, municipal, provincial, and federal. Very well informed. I respect the fact that I know that you're not a citizen of this country and therefore you can't vote. Have you ever thought about becoming a citizen so you can vote?
Well, that's a good question. And I've answered it a couple times. There are some issues with becoming a citizen of Canada, even whether you renounce in the U.S. or not renounce. They have certain things they can do to you if they decide they want to do it. And one of them is they can mess with your pensions. Well, I have a military pension, and I have a Social Security pension, and those are the only two forms of income that I have.
Well, I wouldn't jeopardize those either. Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, and at one time I had a piece of property there that I subsequently sold, and they could have got that too. And I was in the military, and I had a high clearance and all that other stuff. But that's the reason that I love Canada. Well, I don't love it as much as I did in '95 when I first came here.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with. I make a big point about money, but it doesn't have anything to do with money. I'm so disappointed in what's going down socially. At any rate,
that's a good answer.
The Isthmus and the refugees. That's just extortion, isn't it? I mean, think about it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's a quid pro quo, but I'm going to repeat something I said on Murphy's Logic on television a while ago. As far as I'm concerned, if keeping the country together psychologically is important, then keeping the country together physically is important. I see this as a federal jurisdiction and federal responsibility, period. I think the idea that Nova Scotia and New Brunswick taxpayers are going to have to pony up provincial funds only for this purpose, it doesn't really make sense. Having said that, and you've said this in the program before, Tony, it's all coming out of the same pockets. It's only a question of who's spending.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good talking to you finally.
And the very last thing,
yes, sir.
If you give me one more second,
sure,
is what I really didn't like about this issue with Houston and the feds and the municipal government. Just before we had the election locally, he comes and the Fed comes out here, sits down, and he has a real cozy picture with Mike Savage. Now, I'm not going to say they were talking liberal business because the municipal doesn't do that. But all of a sudden, the municipal government gets $62 million or $63 million or $83 million from the feds to do housing improvement. But unfortunately, that doesn't do anything but develop another bureaucracy if I read it correctly. There is no money out of that money being spent. Well, that's not true. There is a dribble of that money being spent for housing. So the government, I see why Houston is doing this. He says, you want to wet my post toasties? Well, watch what I'm going to do to you.
Good to hear your voice, Tony. Nice to talk to you finally.
All right.
Thank you.
Murphy, take care. Have a good day.
Bye-bye now. That's Tony here on Open Phones Halifax, and your calls are coming up right after a brief break.
Asked a girl what she wanted to be. She said, baby, can't you see? I want to be famous, a star of the screen, but you can do something in between.
I just don't like to interrupt those guys. You're a Beatles, Vanessa, you're a Beatles fan, right? Yeah. Vanessa Van Den Ness makes our musical choices here. And I've detected over the years listening to Todd and Rick, Geordie, I've detected a bit of a Beatles, is it favoritism? Is it Fab Four favoritism I'm hearing from Vanessa? She's not denying that, by the way. Open Phones Halifax. Good morning, Mike. What's on your mind today?
Would this be me, Mike?
This would be you, sir.
All right. One thing I heard this morning when you had the councillors on was one of the councillors, and I can't remember which one said it, but I thought it was a pretty ignorant comment about how he went on and on about how he hated Cornwallis. Not a very good comment or a smart comment from somebody that's running the city. But anyway.
Well, it was Councillor Cleary, and of course, in that he is not alone. There are a great many people who feel that Cornwallis is largely an evil figure, and that's why the statue of Cornwallis has been removed and the street name has been changed, and so on.
Yeah, well, I go completely the other way with that one, and we have no idea other than some documents that might have been written, and that's one person's side of the story. So unless you lived in those times, I heard all this stuff about the bounty, but the actual documentation shows that there was only one bounty ever paid out. So, I think we're caught up in a lot of this crap with this woke stuff and making sure everybody gets their fair shake in life, and life's not like that. Everybody gets a punch once in a while.
All right. Anything else on your mind, sir?
I totally disagree with that, and the hatred towards Cornwallis, who nobody in this generation knows him or ever did know him. But anyway, one of the things I want to bring up, Steve, was that we got one issue going on here in this country, and it's got to do with one solvable thing: money. We need people, myself included, I'm a senior. I went on my old age last year, and the top dollar for my old age pension last November was $707. I think it might be up to somewhere around $750 a month at this point in time. That's just a ridiculous amount of money. Just an insult the people that have worked and built and helped worked and building this country up. And it's the same with, I used to hear stories of some of the homeless people in the tents would call up and they were getting like $300 a month or something like that. Like, our system is really, really out of whack. $15 minimum wage, which, as statistics are saying, that's like $10 below, the poverty level.
I hear you, sir.
So, we really, the statistics I read, 2023, we gave over $16 billion away in foreign aid.
Yeah, again, I would have to know the source of that information before we could have any kind of discussion about it. But, Mike, I have to move on to other callers today. Thanks, though. And, Robin, you're next on 95.7 News Radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Murphy. I'm so grateful for you taking my call, and I hope my comments are commensurate with your integrity. My first comment is about the upcoming election. I just wanted to mention that when a new leader is in a position, they really kind of ride on the coattails of the previous government's plans. It takes a long time to make those changes, and I think perhaps Mr. Houston right now is hoping to make his own way in this next election. Secondly, this emergent election, when it's $13 million, really $13 million was scheduled to be in next year's budget. So I don't know about you, but I do a lot, like I plan my budget, how much it's going to be for my hydro, my plumbing, everything. And to make a big step like that it wouldn't be something I would jump at easily. And finally, and I apologize for saying this, his advertisement on 95.7 this morning obviously was well planned, and I thought it was quite rude. And I expect more from our political leaders. I expect professionalism and thoughtfulness, and I was just really disturbed by that.
I haven't heard the commercial you're speaking of, but you found the presentation or the language was rude?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll have to give that a listen. Robin, thank you for calling us today.
Thank you for speaking to me, Mr. Murphy.
Open Phones Halifax continues. Kurt, you're next. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, sir?
Not too bad, not too bad. Well, we got a little bit of a mixed bag here today on the radio. Some for an election, some against. But I will say that the way it works, and I know a lot of people get upset when I say this, but we need to have a conservative group in Halifax and in Ottawa in order to get the things that we need to get.
What are the things we need to get?
Whether it's right or wrong, that's the way it works. And Justin Trudeau has done this for 9 years, has starved Nova Scotia with everything that we've needed, has starved us because we won't agree to this or agree to that. Listen, this man has been involved in over 50 and never once has he had to own up to any of it. The man was worth $10 million when he came into power. Now he's worth $300 million.
Yeah, again, sir, I just have to stop you there, Kurt, because I would need some source information before we could have a discussion about that. I have no idea where you draw those figures. Mr. Trudeau's personal wealth, as far as I know, is not known.
It's pretty common, actually, on the Internet. You
Well,
can find that
but
information
sir,
very easily.
the Internet is a
I
medium.
know
The Internet is not a source. We need to know where the information comes from.
It's not your narrative either, Steve.
I have no narrative, sir. No. I'm distinguishing between facts and information, sir. That's all.
Well, this station certainly is that way. But anyways, all I'll say is that in order to get anything done in this country, right, we have to have a Conservative Party here and a Conservative Party in Ottawa in order to get things done. Ottawa hasn't been able to supply us with anything.
All right. Well, that's what elections are for.
No money.
That's what elections are for, and we'll have one here provincially within the month and probably within the year federally. So You'll have your opportunity to make yourself heard, sir. All right. Well, I don't like to hang up on people, but I understand that some people like to hang up on others. Gary, go ahead, please. Good morning.
Yes, Steve. I was talking to one of the leaders this morning there, and I told him, I said, please help the homeless, the veterans, and the seniors, and bring the price down, our food prices down. And I said, I'll vote for you.
And what did they say in return?
Oh, you said they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to do this.
So are you a decided voter? Do you know how you'll vote on November 26th?
Yes, I'll vote. I want the one that is going to do something for me.
And you've already made up your mind on who that is?
Yes.
Very good, sir.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, sir.
I got a book here, your name, a sign on it, and when they write you and Brian Phillips years ago.
Wow. That goes back a ways.
Yes, when you were on Live at 5.
Well, that's an antique.
I dropped in the station when you were there. One time you went and signed it for me.
As I say, that makes the book an antique because I know I'm an antique. Gary, good to talk to you today. Have a great day. Thank you very much. I think the final word of this hour goes to David. Hello, David.
Hey, good morning, sir. How are you?
Doing well.
Good. Thank you for taking my last call.
Yep.
I'd just like to echo the comments of two earlier callers. Number one, Chris, on the birthday of Halifax.
Yes.
And yes, Halifax was founded 275 years ago, and it's a real shame in such a vibrant city that we didn't even recognize that amazing event for our city. Nothing from council, nothing from government anywhere. And that's why we're here, because that happened 275 years ago. And the other thing, not only that, but from our good friend Bill, yes, there is an agreement with the federal government that a shilling be paid every year, and it's common practice in the South End at Point Pleasant Park that there be a shilling ceremony. The last one happened in 2017, and the previous councillor and the city administration would not do that and has not done that.
I'd say we ought to get our shillings together and pay.
Well, we do have shillings in the city trust. It's one a year, and all the details can be seen on a website, hmhps.ca.
Thank you, David.
But maybe that we've had a change in councillor. Maybe we'll see that happen. Thank you very much, Steve. Have a great day.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
All I know is if you agree to do something, you should do it. If we owe the British Crown 7 shillings for Point Pleasant Park, I just say pay it. The Brits don't even use shillings anymore, by the way. They're into pounds and pence, of course. I want to make one quick comment before we take a break, and then we'll have Lisa Barrett in the next half hour and Denis Ryan at 12:30. But I want to distinguish between facts and information. I love to discuss the facts. But I need to be very, very clear in my own mind what those facts are and the source of those facts before we discuss them. It's not that I'm not willing to talk about Pierre or Justin Trudeau's wealth. I certainly am, but I would want to have some facts to go on before launching into a conversation of that kind. And I hope you understand. Even if you don't agree, there's nothing that says we have to agree. We do have to agree to take a break because the bills have to be paid. So we'll pay some bills, have some news, and then come back. It's lunch hour in Halifax here on 95.7 News Radio. Steve Murphy in for Todd Veinotte today. You know, it's hard for me really to accept that it's almost 5 years since a previously unknown virus began spreading around the world and ultimately virtually crippled the planet. In some respects, it seems like yesterday. In other respects, it seems like distant history. But you know, fear and uncertainty spread even more quickly than the virus, as I recall. I was doing the evening news on CTV at the time. People were calling us, and they were very afraid. They were very afraid because people were getting sick, and some people were dying in Europe and South Asia. And in this country and in this province, many people were literally living on the edge, just waiting for the first cases to show up. And they were living in fear. And they had many questions. And then certainly after the virus arrived and began to claim lives, which let us not forget it did in our midst, it claimed many lives. And even the experts didn't really know exactly why. And they didn't really know much about COVID-19 and how it was spread. So we did a lot of things to protect ourselves. And it was during this time that most of us first heard the calming but authoritative voice of Dr. Lisa Barrett. An infectious disease specialist, Dr. Barrett deftly parsed the complex science into terms that I think most of us easily understood, even as she admitted from the very beginning that as the science evolved, our understanding and handling of the disease would evolve. And indeed, it has. And so after hundreds, if not perhaps thousands of interviews, Lisa Barrett remains a trusted voice and a source of information about COVID and infectious diseases. And she is here with us today. And it's great to see you.
And it's lovely to see you.
And I was thinking, Lisa, over the years, I've interviewed you, I would say dozens of times on television, but this is the first time we've ever been in the same studio.
It is. This is a real treat. Yeah. I'm smiling deeply as I say this.
Thank you. But that says something about the way COVID was. So many relationships were forged in social media and so on. People, I mean, it was the semblance of conversation, but it wasn't very personal in many respects. That was the legacy of COVID too, perhaps.
Potentially. I certainly have only started now to meet hundreds, actually, of people, both professionally and personally, that I saw only virtually over COVID. So,
and they saw you, of course.
Some people saw me, yeah.
How much COVID is there in our midst right now? We're not talking about it the way we were a year ago, 2 years ago, certainly not 4 years ago, but how much of it is out there right now?
Mm-hmm. Of course, there's the global context and the Canadian context. We'll stick with Canadian. We get our information as to how things may go from the Southern Hemisphere. But around us at the moment, we've just come through a bit of a peak. Our early fall peak has just kind of started to come down at the moment. And for a while there, I bet you walked around in late August, early September, mid-September, and everyone around you had COVID. And
I did.
Yeah, everybody had COVID. So we're starting to come down a little bit from that now. But to be clear, I have not seen a time in this country where we have gone to next to zero cases, the way we do with influenza. So that is a very distinct difference compared to flu.
That's a very important point you've just made. Since the arrival of the virus, we have never gotten to a point where there are statistically no cases.
Right. And of course, many will say, well, that's because we still test more and we offer people more opportunities to test for COVID. Maybe. But certainly there is still COVID around all the time, just at different levels right now.
With all of the mutations and the various strains there have been, is the COVID we're dealing with now even the same disease as the one we first encountered?
Great question. And it's really tough to tell when we're talking about the sickness that people get from a virus. We have to take a few things into account. The actual virus itself and what it's capable of doing, what its little tools are to cause disease when they infect somebody. And then there's also the host, us, humans. And how sick we get or the disease or illness we get depends on what our immunity looks like. And so it's not just about how nasty the virus is. It's also about how much immunity people have at an individual level. So we have more immunity. The virus has not gotten particularly more nasty, but it continues to evolve and it tries to avoid the immune system frequently. So what is the net result for most healthy people who are not extra old? It's that the absolute symptoms or illness that we get, especially if you've got immunity from vaccines and from having had COVID before, it seems to be getting a little less intense. However, there is still the ability for the virus to evade. And also, there is still the fact that the virus is very, very rapidly changing, and that can mean it can shift quite a bit.
And some people are still getting very sick.
There are. And so that was the caveat. If you're a host that doesn't have a good immune system or you're very old, P.S., there's quite a few older people out there, particularly in Canada.
For the purpose of the discussion, where does old begin? What demographic are we speaking about?
Right. We tend to somewhat, just because this is the way we do it, think about 60 to 65 as older, right. But particularly people who are 75 and older, the same as with flu, we know that those folks are likely to get much sicker, particularly if they have other diseases.
Is there any sign or any hope for what we talked about 5 years ago, herd immunity, where eventually everybody's either had it or been vaccinated against it, so it'll go away?
This virus, as far as I can tell, as somebody who studies infections and does some research and lab work on viruses, I don't see this virus ever going away.
Ever?
I don't see it going away. I think it's now become part of our flora, our usual group of viruses that are circulating.
So it's like the common cold in terms of resilience?
It's like the common cold in that it's always going to be around with us, but I am going to be very different in some other doctors and say, I think it's more important and should stay very separate when we talk about the impact on people compared to the common cold.
That is the voice of Dr. Lisa Barrett. We're here talking about COVID-19. Is it still COVID-19 or have we abandoned that name?
We mostly get rid of the 19,
okay.
But so COVID.
So COVID 2024 is not COVID-19. I mean, it has mutated enough that it is different.
Yes. So still, if you were talking about it from a human perspective, still all, the same species of virus, but different enough that if you looked at it, you would see a visual difference, if you will, if you were talking about humans and the fact that there are different kinds of humans and different cultures and races. It's a different culture and race.
In your own mind, or perhaps even more generally, is it settled science yet as to where it actually came from? Did it come from a laboratory in China? Did it come from caves, from meerkats, from bats? Do we know? Will we ever know?
The vast amount of the actual facts, I love your facts versus information. The facts suggest that this was something that likely came from an animal reservoir, like a bat, cat, probably a bat, and that is the best science. You can interpret things many ways, but the best science and scientists at the moment, I agree with that this came from one of our animal reservoirs.
Could it have come from an animal reservoir by way of a lab?
Oh, goodness. Who knows? But again, if you look at the actual facts that we have and you put them together, the best information. And this is not weird. This happens all the time. This is how new viruses often come to people. This is not weird or unusual that an animal is a reservoir and it comes to people and we have no immunity and bang, this happens. That is how pandemic flus happen.
The difference this time, of course, is that it is both politically and social media charged.
So I hear.
Yes. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with Dr. Lisa Barrett after a brief break. Not polite to interview, or I should say interrupt Gordon Lightfoot. But I'm going to jump in because we're here with Dr. Lisa Barrett, and we're talking about COVID-19. I want to spend a few minutes, Lisa, talking about what we now know versus what we didn't know then. You were, I think, among the first medical authorities to tell us that our knowledge of COVID was constantly changing. In fact, the first time I had you on CTV News, when you came on, we did about 45 minutes of questions. And you prefaced it all by saying, I'm going to tell you what we know now, but this is going to change. So looking back and with the benefit of almost 5 years of research and hindsight and experience and hardship and so on, is it possible to say what we got wrong about COVID and how it was spread back in the beginning? Or did we mostly get it right?
I think when folks took an approach to be extra careful up front until we knew more, that was a right approach. Do I think being dogmatic about words and terms like airborne versus not were helpful? I don't. Look around, look at how things spread, and then regardless of what you call it, we should have probably understood that this spreads far more easily than we would have expected, and that our precautions needed to be responsive to that.
So if I may parse your words, we spent too much time with the Lysol on our desktops and maybe not enough time putting masks on. Or were we a little fast with the Lysol and too slow with the masks?
Yeah, I would say we were a little slower on the masking, though not perfect. And the data will never be perfect because people have lost interest in doing this work in a lot of the research spaces.
You haven't lost it.
I have not lost any interest in it, but I think a lot of folks don't want to put the money into that part of things at the moment to study transmission of viruses prospectively, and that's still important. But the pragmatic approach, you're right. Did we really worry too much about surfaces more than masks? We probably did, and that's a little bit of human behavior. And that comes to the thing I think we ignored the most during the pandemic and might not have gotten right, which is human behavior.
Speaking of human behavior, this was a little counterintuitive for most of us. Most of us thought when we heard about this then that we should put on a mask. I remember discussing this not so much with you, but with public health people who were of the view, and this was the body of opinion, that masking wasn't necessary, it wasn't a good idea. But in defense of the lay community, I think many of us wanted to put on a damn mask a lot earlier than we were encouraged or even allowed to do so. So maybe human nature wasn't totally out of touch with that reality.
I think sometimes human behavior was very, very tuned in. The piece I think that may not have been done so well is our recognition that to do well in a pandemic and with a virus, we need to understand human behavior and respect it. That part, I think people had some right things. And, again, this comes back to, I think, also understanding that there is diversity of what level of data or information or fact gets people to behavior change and what doesn't.
Human beings are also skeptical by nature, and in the beginning there was a good deal of skepticism, some of it amplified in social media, about mRNA vaccines, which were developed for COVID very quickly. I mean, a real triumph of science. They were developed quickly.
Absolutely.
But big but, they were relatively untested, and some people were afraid of them. And I think that's human nature. What have we learned about mRNA vaccines in the last 4 years, and is there anything that has proven risky or undesirable about the vaccines we used?
And just so we make sure we're clear, the mRNA technology had been in trials of different types of diseases and uses for many, many years. And it was the sense that this was engineering that scared people, and it didn't go forward as quickly as it might have. So new to vaccines for COVID, but not a new technology. Have we learned that it's riskier or that people had a well-founded sense that we shouldn't be doing this?
Hesitation.
Hesitation. Has that borne out? No more so than anything we do, either a procedure, a surgery. There is a certain amount of risk, and sometimes people will have a side effect. But it has not at all proven in billions of doses to be worse, at least worse, if not even just as safe as any other vaccine technology we use, or honestly, many of the other procedures we do that have higher risk every day in medicine and health. So of all of the things I've seen during the pandemic, mRNA as a technology for vaccines, I am not sorry we went ahead with, and I think it was tested enough and it's proven itself.
Have we had enough time pass yet to be certain?
Yeah, that's another great question. Maybe there's a downstream effect in 10 years. I don't know, and that would require me to be clairvoyant.
I was good, or a time traveler. In which event we're talking about the wrong stuff.
Yes, we really should be talking about something different.
I want to talk about the gold price in 10 years.
Indeed.
Yep.
We don't know. Do I have a good... I'm a reasonably skeptical person myself, to be honest. And as a scientist, my job is not to prove what I think. It's to disprove it before I believe it to be fact. That is the basis of a scientist. And if there's one thing I am, it's a scientist. And I can't come up with a biologic rationale for why an mRNA side effect would show up many, many years later, given what it does and how it works. Again, I never say anything is impossible because that's dismissive and, well, one should never do that. But having tried to disprove something and make it unsafe in my head and come up with a plausible explanation, I can't find one.
All of that said, there is no precedent.
Absolutely.
I want to ask about the future because I think that, well, you told me you were 10 years in the future. No, I'm only kidding. No, but the future in terms of what we need to prepare for, because we all knew, even school children were told, we were told that there had been a global pandemic, a terrible global pandemic 100 years ago. And we were all warned in sort of general terms that it would happen again. I mean, it's going to happen again.
Oh, it is.
Is it going to be sooner or later, or is there any way to know? And what should we do to be prepared for either eventuality?
Yeah, the feeling is, and again, I'm not an expert in pandemic prediction. I do help out on some of that planning work in different fora and different places and spaces. And the feeling is that it probably will be within a number of years, not 20, 30, or 40, but, maybe less than 10. And it's probably going to be influenza next again. What are we doing to prepare for that? Well, there's committees up the wazoo, as you can imagine at this point, global and otherwise. You know what would be lovely at a pragmatic and every single person level? It would be for folks to feel that it's their job and their right to be informed and to stay abreast, to be given information and to ask for it about what's going on in the world with viruses and infections, because they are important. And respiratory viruses that are in our air are important. Ask the questions, and groups of people that govern and lead need to not ignore what's happening. And that information needs to get shared, I think, a little more freely and explained. I think people are far smarter than they're given credit for a lot of the time. And people should ask for information. That will help us because people will be more informed and be their own expert at a real level, not just a social media level.
And this comes back to something we were discussing earlier, and that is that if nature abhors the vacuum, social media particularly abhors it. And absent good information, the bad information takes off like wildfire. Final question. Are you masking in public spaces these days, or are you still not?
Depends, honestly.
Okay.
If it's in a time of a peak of virus and I'm going to go out somewhere in a crowded space, I will mask for a while. If I need to eat, I'm going to take my mask off. So if you see me and I got a mask off and I'm eating, that's because I got to eat. But because I get asked that question a lot. But if it's a time when the virus has gotten lower and I'm at the grocery store and I'm going to be zipping by someone and not hanging out with some older folks, I may not mask. So right now, but I have the information. I read RespWatch that comes out from the government every week. I know the numbers. I try and make sure other people do. And if it's a lot of virus around, I don't want COVID again because it's different than other viruses and it's not just a respiratory virus.
It's great of you to come in and share a few minutes with us. Really, really appreciate your expertise and have all along. It's always been excellent to hear your point of view on these things.
And I appreciate the time and space that you dedicate to an important issue.
The last of Barrett's privateers. Dr. Lisa Barrett of Dalhousie University. Back in just a moment.
I am a weaver, a cotton weaver.
His lips are moving. Do you know it's more than 50 years since we first heard those three young lads from Ireland belt out traditional tunes, Irish tunes like Nancy Whiskey? Dermot, Fergus, and Dennis came to Canada 1969, and they were performing around Toronto using names like Sullivan's Gypsies and the Sons of Erin. And then back in the early 70s, they relocated to St. John's, Newfoundland to pursue higher learning and other social sciences. Before long, of course, they were on stages across Atlantic Canada performing as Ryan's Fancy and on a national television show of the same name. Peter Zosky once proclaimed the boys the best Irish band in North America.
Wow.
And despite that, they disbanded in 1983, but they paved the way for Irish music in Atlantic Canada. And the leader of the band, Denis Ryan has been in our midst since 1980, and he's here in the studio with us today.
Well,
How are you? Nice to hear you.
Am I loud? I can turn it down a bit here.
No,
can
turn
I?
it down,
Yeah,
sure.
Turn it, whatever. I listen to myself. It makes me sick, right?
I was going to ask you, how do you feel when you hear those young fellows singing? Now it makes you sick.
Oh, Jesus. But just to hear Dermot, who died like 12 or 13 years ago.
God rest his soul.
God rest. He was one of the greats of all time. Tommy Makem, the great Tommy Makem, we always have people in any business, anybody's business, there's somebody you always admire. Well, my sort of man that cut it for the rest of us was Tommy Makem, an unbelievable, brilliant storyteller, singer.
Sure was.
He had
You performed with him, too.
Yeah, well, that's how we got our television series.
Yeah.
With Tommy Makem and Ryan's Fantasy. But Tommy always said to me, and he played with the best of them, and then he teamed up with Liam, and he said his favourite Irish singer was Dermot O'Reilly. And I thought that was the ultimate compliment.
You had it going in the music industry in a big way. You were famous. You had a TV show, and yet you got out of it. You got into the securities business, and I assume you did reasonably well. But tell me something. Why did you not do what so many people in the music industry do, which is stay with it until you can't do it anymore?
No. Well, you know what? I don't know whether it was being smart or the three of us. I remember we were driving from Calgary to Banff, and it was the fall of the year in 81 or whatever, and we were chatting away. We saw the mountains coming up against us, and we were together now for 12 years or 11 or 12 years. A long time in the business to be together without killing each other.
And you were doing really well.
We were doing really well.
Yeah.
But I think we smelt a rat. We said, first of all, Dermot was the one above all of us. He said, I think, guys, we should call it quits. So we said, let's decide next year, the 1st of July, at the end of June next year, we're not doing any more gigs. And no matter what happens during the winter. And then I started working with Gundy. I was in Toronto training back and forth, and I came back here.
Yeah.
And I remember one thing we always wanted to do, I'll never forget this. I got a call from Brooks Diamond, and he says, the Atlantic Symphony on July the 1st are doing a concert on the Hill or something, and they'd love you to be a guest. And Dermot said, no, guys, that was July the 1st. And he said, no,
we're done.
We decided at the end of June we're done, because if we accept one gig, we're going to accept more gigs, right?
In a sense, deciding to quit helped to build the mythology, because the band is still well known. The name is still well known. You're still well known. The boys were all well known.
Yeah. I think the reason is, I don't know, I think we decided to get out while we were still relatively young and had energy. And
well, you were all young. This is 40 years ago.
Well,
you get
I
out.
know that. Yeah.
Now you've been performing since. I'm not saying,
not really,
and you still
don't.
sound good when I hear you.
Yeah, I don't. I just do the odd benefit or fun thing or whatever. But I think that the decision. I remember talking to John Allen about this.
John Allen Cameron.
Yeah, the late John Allen. I said, John, get out of it while you're in the top.
Yeah.
And I remember well, and he some people can't. But we made our decision to get out while we were still up there. Right?
I want to ask you how you made the decision to come here, you and Dermot O'Reilly and Fergus O'Byrne. How did you come to decide to come to Canada?
Well, the boys came before me. Dermot was a bus conductor in Dublin, and I don't think Fergus had just finished high school, and his parents had moved to Detroit. And I used to play in a folk club in Dublin in the late 60s that Dermot used to play in. He used to play with a group called the Parnell Folk, and I was
in
with
Parnell Street.
That's exactly Parnell House. Actually, was the name of the famous pub.
Yeah.
And he used to play twice a week, and I played twice a week for 4 pints and 10 shillings. That was our pay. But we were all amateurs. I never met Dermot until I came to Canada, and we sort of back and forth got together and blah blah. So at 71, I said, boys, I've got to get out of here. I just had my second Siobhan. She was 3 weeks old. I said, guys, I've been to Newfoundland twice. I love the place.
Yeah.
I want to go back to school. I just want to get the post-secondary education. And Dermot and Fergus said, you know what, we're going to go too. So
and you all went to Memorial University of St. John's. You have a degree in folklore.
Yeah, I do, yeah. I tried to get into medicine and I flunked. So I flunked organic
but you got a doctorate anyway. Listen, you had names before Ryan's Fancy. Why Ryan's Fancy and not O'Reilly's Fancy or O'Byrne's Fancy?
No, it's very interesting you say that. So when we were deciding to go back to Newfoundland, all of a sudden we were getting some gigs here, the Black Knight Lounge, Johnny Reid in Charlottetown, the Strand Lounge in St. John's, and we needed a name for the group. So the three of us got together and And Dermot had just started a group called O'Reilly's Men before that. I said, let's call it O'Reilly's Men. And I had written this jig. Actually, I really didn't write it. I stole it. I put my own... I plagiarism. I think I put my own name in the corner.
Don't mistake me for a priest and confess to me now.
But so I wrote this little tune called Ryan's Fancy, and the boys said, because a lot of traditional tunes were called Somebody's Fancy. You know what I mean? So the guy said, we're looking for a name. Let's decide Ryan's Fancy. And I said, guys, I don't like it. I prefer O'Reilly's Men. And they said, let's stick with Ryan's Fancy. We need the name in a hurry in the next 24 hours to call into Charlottetown or John Hall up at the Black Knight Lounge or wherever, right? So that's simply how it started.
Where's the first place you played in this town?
Under Ryan's, the Black Knight Lounge.
The Black Knight.
In the Halifax Shopping Centre.
Yeah.
Jam solid every night.
Wasn't yesterday.
No, jeez.
You've lived here in Halifax since 1980. I mean, you went to Newfoundland, you got your degree. You moved here. What's the attraction? Why'd you stay here?
Well, I love Newfoundland, by the way. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the world. Very isolated. I got stuck there many times. We used to do our television series in Hamilton, Ontario.
CHCH-TV?
Yeah, CHCH. So we'd fly up there. Many times we couldn't get back in for 2 or 3 days. We'd land in Halifax because of the fog, or we'd land in Gander or whatever. And so I met my late friend Jim McNeil in PEI, the first person I met in Prince Edward Island. And I used to go there in the summer for a little holiday in the summer. And Jim said, you should come and live here. In 1977, I left Newfoundland, lived in PEI for 3 years, and then I said, the business is going to last forever. I want to get into some form of business. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had a lot of contacts around Halifax, and the population here, the central part of Atlantic Canada, and that's the reason I came, and it's been good to me.
And you got into the financial business, the securities business.
Yeah.
And you, by all accounts, did okay.
That was all fluky, too.
We're not taking up a collection for you. You were on Seaside FM the other day raising money for the Dartmouth General Hospital. You've been a big supporter of causes, Dennis, over the years.
Yeah, I have a lot of things on the go quietly, but I'm just, some of them in Africa, some of them in this country, some of them in Europe, but a lot of them in our local region. That's what I love. I mean, I have all the time in the world to do what I want to do, right? And just enjoy it as I go along. I'm not a great reader, but I'm beginning to read at the age of 80. Can you believe that?
Are you 80?
I'm 80, yeah.
God love you.
Yeah, I just finished, when I have all those things they call dyslexia and all that stuff today, but I had that stuff 60, 70 years ago.
Before it had a name.
Before it had a name, yeah.
I'm here with Denis Ryan, he of Ryan's Fancy, man about town, and we're going to talk about some other things with Denis Ryan in just a moment.
Take me back to my western boat. Let me fish off Cape St. Mary.
The voice of Denis Ryan. And this is also the voice of Denis Ryan. What goes through your mind now when you hear that song? You've sung that at many occasions.
Yeah.
I remember the funeral for the late Premier Joe Giz.
Yeah, that's right.
In the cathedral in Charlottetown.
Yeah, that was respect. I get requests to sing at funerals, would you believe it?
But it's that song particularly, Dennis, right?
Yeah, that particular song. And I think in Newfoundland, there's something there's magic about Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. But the first time I heard that song, actually, was with the late Jack Crosby, who was a pediatrician in Grand Falls, who was John Crosby's first cousin, and that was 72, and a fella called the late Mike Maguire, Dr. Maguire from Ireland, and we were doing a gig. We went back to this house party, and the music started at 3 o'clock in the morning, and all these doctors had young kids, and they're all coming down the stairs, and blah, 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 and they started playing that song, and somebody started singing it. I totally fell in love with it, and of course then I got to know the writer of the song, and I did a television show with him, Otto Kelland, back in 77 out in San Monier Line, and I had the privilege of spending a day with him, and a marvellous human being. He was a few days short of 100. But he'd written some other great songs. And he wrote that song, by the way, in about 10 minutes, he told me.
A lot of the great songs were written quickly.
Yeah.
With a name like Murphy, you won't be surprised that I'm going to ask you about the Irish quality of Halifax. Irish has always been a factor in Halifax, but it's become much better known in the 40-odd years since you've been here. You're partly responsible for that.
Well, I don't know, but there's some great, there's one or two great organisations here, and I think the media and stuff that happens, like people like Pat Curran, Judge Curran, I think he's retired now.
With the Charitable Irish.
Yes, he's done some great work, and he's taught himself to be a fluent Gaelic speaker.
I know.
and all those people at St Mary's University, led by which I was sort of the fundraising chair there 35 years ago for the chair of Irish Studies. Cyril Byrne, what another great man! My God, another great Newfoundlander Irishman.
And of course, we now have Brian Doherty, who's the consul of Ireland in Halifax. So the Irish fact has kind of come alive in Halifax. It had been quiet for a long time.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think it was always there, and the Benevolent Irish Society have been around for 200 years.
Oh yeah.
And they've done fantastic work too in the old days when they were sort of a charitable organisation.
As famous as you were in the music industry, you decided to go into the securities business. And I'm not going to ask you about your business, but I will ask you this. Your degree's in folklore. You're a gifted musician. Where did your financial savvy come from? Because you've backed a lot of great businesses and you've raised a lot of money. You know your way around the bank.
Yeah, but no, that's only luck. That's only fluke.
Oh, come on now.
And I'll tell you
I'm acquainted with the luck of the Irish. You wouldn't call it luck at all, would you?
Well, I think I was at the right place. Look, I tell you, Steve, being at the right place at the right time. And just a short little story. It'll take me 45 seconds to tell you.
All right.
I was honorary Big Brother for Atlantic Canada in 81, 82. And we were at a fundraising thing in United Way. We're making a big donation to Big Brothers, and they asked me would I accept the cheque. I said I will, and a fella called the late Don Monroe, who's the manager of Wood Gundy at the time and used to be president of Central Trust, was the president of United Way, and he accepted a cheque. And I was looking at him, and I was always interested about the business, the securities business, and he had a lovely three-piece suit, which I didn't own at the time. And I said, I'd be very interested. What do you do? I said, I'd be very interested in your business. He said, give me a call. That's how it all started.
And the next thing you know, you've got your ticket and away you go.
And away you go, yeah.
Back in 2010, Dennis, you became a worldwide internet sensation, if I might, for your somewhat salty, shall we say, attack on the big banks. Now, having worked in securities, you knew some bankers who you called wankers. I think we're allowed to use that term on the radio now.
Yep.
You called the bankers, and you went on about the banks, and you said some very, very blunt things. I mean, has a banker spoken to you since?
Yeah, they have. Actually. Well, yeah. Actually, my best friend in Dublin, we went to school together in Limerick, and he's a wanker. But anyway, he laughed at it. But he wasn't at the top of the heap. He wasn't. See, in Ireland, we only had 3 banks. And they were going back to the 1800s, and they dominated everything. Small little community. Everybody was excited. There was probably 10 big developers in Ireland and business people, and they were all tied in with the banks, and they were shareholders of each other's companies and directors. And it was a real disaster. And the government, of course, let it all slip by, and nobody thought that the day of reckoning would come, and it came. Sad thing about all that, people like my brother, who was a policeman who's retired, and my sister-in-law, a nurse, retired, all their pensions were cut back by something like 10 or 15% because of the behaviour of these assholes.
But the truth is, the banks are a very important part of our economy in this country. And even though we love to hate them, the banks, the shares in the chartered banks form a huge percentage of the Canada Pension Plan, most of our RRSPs and so on. We have a love-hate relationship with the banks.
But Canada is different, though. Canada, you can't own more than 10% of a bank in Canada. So
we have a couple of local fellows who come pretty close.
That's right. But see, it's almost like a utility. You and I could manage the banks in Canada, and these clowns are getting $20 million a year for seed. No, we all. They're very well regulated.
Yes,
they're very solid. The best foundations of any banks in the world are in Canada.
Yeah. I was once told by a banker in this town, if you want to make money, put your money in the bank stock, not in the bank.
Well, there's a lot of truth about that.
I wish I'd done it. Yeah. Wish I'd done it. You have always been outspoken. You speak your mind. You've always done that. Did you ever consider politics? And be honest with me now.
No, I maybe for the odd time my ego would come into play. And I remember probably 20 years ago, I got a call from a Liberal and a Tory. Would I run for mayor of Halifax?
Right.
And I actually thought about it for 10 seconds. And then I said, oh, my God, I can't get into that stuff, right?
10 seconds?
Yeah, 10. Yeah, I know. And I was invited to run against Alexa McDonough, who's a great friend of our family, and her kids and my kids all went to school together for a particular party way back. And I couldn't do that either because the late Peter and the late Alexa were good friends of ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but I wouldn't do it anyway. I don't have it. I don't have that. I like the freedom. I don't want to be tied in with anybody. The last local election here, I'm more interested in local elections. I mean, provincial elections or federal or politics doesn't really interest me, but local elections do, because I think we can have an input.
Are you a partisan, though? I mean, do you have a party that you like?
Well, I would, I voted Tories when Brian Mulroney ran. And I don't know whether that was Irish or whether his connections with St. Yves, or I don't know what it was. I've voted for Paul Martin, and I think I'm gone smarter now. I can't. I mean, everybody's too much information today, right? And I don't. I'll wait for who my candidate is.
In the municipal election, you endorsed Andy Fillmore.
I did, yeah.
Who won? We're into a provincial election campaign now. Are you going to endorse somebody for premier?
That's a really tough one. And the tough thing about that is, I know the leader of the NDP. I met her a few times. I'm very impressed. I know the leader of the Liberal Party, and I know Premier Houston, and I've met him a few times actually. And some of his family come from, as you know, county, as I was telling you, the Cooley Mountains.
County Louth.
Yeah, County Louth, yeah. So it's very, I want to see who my candidate is in my riding. I think that's the most important thing for me, who's running in my riding. Then I'll make my decision.
You a Trudeau fan?
Not these days. I was, in the beginning, yeah. And personally speaking, I wish he had just bowed out and gone out there before the last election. But, you get in there, it's like, going back to the old story, it's very hard to quit.
It is very hard to quit. It's very hard to know when to go.
Yeah.
But you did musically.
Yeah.
What do you suppose? Is it simply a matter of ego with people that they don't know to quit? I mean, Frank McKenna, who joked on television again yesterday, and he said this to me in many interviews over the years, he gets more praise for quitting than he did for staying. Because on the first day of the 11th year, he said, "That's it, I'm done," and he walked away.
Yeah. I admire Frank a lot. I've known Frank when he was a young lawyer up in Newcastle or in Chatham. Yeah, I was in his house actually. I think with a fella called David Cadogan, who owned a weekly newspaper in Chatham. But there's certain people I think Danny Williams did it. I don't think Danny Williams got defeated, did he?
I think he walked away.
Yeah, I think he walked away too. It's very hard to do it.
Mike Savage is walking away. Mike Savage could have been mayor again, I believe.
Yeah.
And he's walked into another job now. I'm not going to ask you about the Republican politics of Ireland.
No. I wonder what does his father say about his new job. I'm leaving it at that.
We'll have to leave that as a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
Finally, I do want to just give you a moment about charity, because you've done an awful lot of good work around here. I don't know we give ourselves enough credit for the amount of good work that gets done in this town. And for a small city, and we're close to 500,000 now, but we punch over our weight when it comes to generosity here.
Well, we do actually in many ways. And there are people, we probably have 8 or 10 very wealthy families here.
Yeah.
And we're always knocking on their doors to give us a few bucks for this and for that and the other thing. And some of these people, like, for example, I got a call this morning from Jack Fleming. Now, Jack is an amazing man, what he has done in our 88 years of age, what he has done in our community. Yeah. And he got that hospice going down there, and the amount he saved that, and he's an unbelievable. Well, there are 5 or 6 Jack Flemings in our community, and I think generally people, I just saw doing the Dartmouth Hospital telethon thing there last week.
A couple of $100,000.
Yeah,
on the radio
in a few hours.
Yeah,
and the people that work there at the hospital too, they deserve. They all put back money into their organisation, So
a good place made better by the likes of yourself.
Well,
and we're lucky that you came. We're lucky that you stayed, and we love to hear you.
Yeah,
singing or otherwise.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
It's like the old days on St. Patrick's Day on CJCH. I used to have Dennis on. We'd call his dear sainted mother in Tipperary and get her to describe the parade.
Yeah,
I thought I was in Tipperary a few years ago, and I thought of that.
Yeah, my poor mother used to give us the menu for her soda bread or whatever.
Exactly
right.
Jeez. Speaking of soda bread, it's lunchtime. I think Dennis and I are going to go have some lunch. But Dennis, thank you for being here today. I want to thank everybody who participated in the program today, Dr. Barrett and the councillors who were here earlier, but most importantly, all of you who listen. And we know most people don't call. It's okay, but we're glad you listen. We're glad you call when you do. And of course, this little program doesn't happen every day without the genius and the persistence and the elegance of Vanessa Van Den Ness on the other side of the glass. The people you hear on the radio get a disproportionate amount of credit for all the good work that the producers do. So hats off to Vanessa. And hats off to all of you. Have yourselves a good afternoon across Nova Scotia, and we'll talk to you again next Monday. Be well, everybody.